Here we have the flag for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was formerly known as Zaire, but even before that was known as Belgian Congo or Congo Free State. So once again, I'm going to use that particular colony, kind of use it as a case study to understand, well, what's going on there today, and how does that have any connection to its historical legacy of colonial rule. Before we begin, as a quick little icebreaker, go ahead and go to Google News, do a search for the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I guarantee you'll probably find not a lot of positive things. You'll probably find some rebels seizing an area. You'll find some conflict. You'll find some corruption, maybe some resource curse. They might be mentioning resources. They might mention the role of China now investing in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So no matter what, this doesn't matter if this is 5 years from when I'm recording this now. You're going to still see some of these same negatives going on here in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And once again, the legacies we can understand going back to the colonial era. One negative that we'll focus in on is the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so is this a big deal? About 6 million, some have even estimated up to close to 9 million people have died as a result of this conflict. So essentially, this is, since World War II, the world's largest conflict. But nobody knows about it. So what's going on here? What is underlying and explaining the conflict? We got a few different factors at work. First off, there's competition over minerals. And I'll describe the mineral here in a minute. No longer is it rubber, it's a new mineral, among a few others, that's becoming the key thing that people want to have power and have control over. Other things going on is, of course, you've got the ethnic group rivalries. And so these, when the Belgian Congo, when the lines were drawn for the Belgian Congo, had no regard for individual ethnic groups. And so here, especially in the eastern part of the country, there's all these ethnic groups and all these rivalries and all this tension. And very, one simple way to showcase this is the country that's next to Congo, Rwanda. Look up what happened there in the 1990s. If you haven't heard of this, there's a movie called Hotel Rwanda. And so that same genocide, those same conflicts, the same ethnic cleansing, the same rivalries essentially spill over into the neighboring country, the DRC. So essentially, neighboring countries, neighboring states are being drawn into this conflict. And so sometimes you'll actually have rebel groups who are fighting against the DRC, fighting against the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who are being supported by a neighboring state. Even further, because if we look at the map of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, much of the power of the country is found over in the western part of the country, in the capital city of Kinshasa, which once again is explained because of its historical legacy as a port city in which all the resources were brought to that particular location, then eventually sent out to other areas beyond the continent of Africa. So essentially what happened is that the infrastructure is designed to get stuff out, and it's designed to get everything out to the west. And so there in the eastern part, it's pretty much it's free wide open as far as being able to to do whatever you want, being able to rule, because it's very, very far from the power center there in the western part. And so actually what ends up happening is the DRC, actually their own soldiers will oftentimes in the eastern part sell their guns, sell their ammunition, switch sides, switch allegiances. And so this is why it's very, very, very complex and very complicated in this part of the world. Another key problem going on here is the fact there's a lot of refugees, a lot of forced migrants. And so once again, if you have conflict coming to your backyard, it's going to maybe cause you to move. So key here also is with ethnic cleansing being used in abundance in this particular area, people are definitely forced to leave when all of a sudden their entire village, doesn't matter who, is wiped out by the competing ethnic group. So here you see a lot of migrants who flee the country, who go into other countries, and that only further complicates the problem. So here we have a lot of refugees. And so in some countries that might have peace and stability, all of a sudden you get people coming from outside your country that are moving to your country in which you already have just a few resources in a large population, higher birth rates, higher fertility rates, higher population growth rates. This can be even more of a key challenge. And so you see a lot of the problems in the DRC are now filtering over into other countries as these refugees, they want to live, they don't want to die, who then have to migrate to new areas and then once again find a way of life there. And so another key problem is the forced migration created from the conflict in the DRC. Here's a map of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and once again, about 6 million people have died from this conflict. How are most of those people dying? a good amount aren't dying from actually violence, from bullets. Instead, they're dying from infectious diseases. And so, in war-torn, conflict-heavy areas, oftentimes people don't get the help they need. The infrastructure, especially in war-torn areas, is not going to get people who have malaria or maybe diarrhea or certain simple infectious disease, simple preventable diseases from getting the access to the treatment that they need to simply fix their problem, their small ailment. And so a lot of people are dying of infectious diseases, things that we very, very easily as far as being prevented. So if you look over on the eastern side of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you see a lot of conflict is in the city of Goma, which is right there along the Rwandan border. And so this is going to be an area in which you're going to continue to see a lot of conflict. Even further, there's a particular mineral found in a heavy abundance in the eastern part of the continent, eastern part of the state, and that's coltan, Coltan. What is coltan? It's this mineral that's found in a few parts of the world. Australia is another key location, but as far as in Africa, you see it in abundance in this particular area. What is it? If you have an Apple iPhone, if you have an Apple iPad, good chance that coltan is somewhere in that device. And so inside that device you're holding in your hand, potentially, came from this particular part of the world, coltan. And so essentially what's happening is, where do a lot of those Apple iPhones, where does a lot of the stuff, where they've assembled? China. So China has invested heavily into the DRC, and they're all about getting coltan. Why? Because it's something that's widely consumed in the global market. So just like how rubber was big in King Leopold's time, now the big mineral, now coltan, is now being used and is essentially a conflict mineral. And so we might have conflict diamonds. For example, Kanye West talked about those in Sierra Leone. We also have conflict diamonds in other areas of Africa. Well, conflict, in this case, conflict coltan. And so these different ethnic groups, these different tribes, these different areas, these different cultures, all want to have control, all want to have access, unlimited access to this key resource that they can profit on in huge amounts by selling it to overseas markets. So here we've had a lot of conflict since about 1998. We've had a lot of conflict. Well, why can't the United Nations do anything about it? So there's a few different reasons why. First off, the United Nations, by rule, they have to wear these outfits. These, for the most part, all white outfits, and have blue hats, light blue hats, and so they have to be very, very easily identified. And so let's say they kind of come up on a conflict, and you see the United Nations coming. You're all of a sudden going to, act like nothing's going on. Go, oh, nothing to see here. And so a lot of times the United Nations, they don't really see conflict. They see the kind of the outcomes of it, mass graves, large villages that have been wiped out and ethnically cleansed. Other reasons why the United Nations kind of hasn't been able to do anything is just to kind of use an analogy. I'm an only child. I never had a sibling. But imagine you have two kids, two brothers who are just fighting, just beating the hell out of each other. And all of a sudden mom comes into the room. What will mom do? Mom will say, all right, okay, little Billy, you go over here. Little Timmy, you go over there. Everyone needs to calm down. What happens when mom leaves? Essentially, you know what? They all of a sudden, little Timmy, little Billy go back to fighting each other. And so another thing is the United Nations might come into an area, create a little peace, kind of, that's their mission, is to make sure this area has less conflict. And then once they leave, all hell breaks loose, and so everything that was happening before the UN arrived starts to fuel up again. And so the United Nations hasn't been too successful as far as being able to lessen the conflict, to bring peace to this particular area. And those are just a couple reasons why. I'm sure there's many, many more explain why the United Nations hasn't been able to help this area. Now time for a deeper thinking question. Does colonialism still exist in Africa today? Is there a new kind of colonialism? I would argue yes, there is. So while there isn't the European states still claiming these areas as their own, still claiming these areas as their own colonies, you can see how multinational corporations, for example, Apple and their products, along with, for example, China, these newer countries, are now investing in Africa, claiming areas, and so you're still seeing this whole idea of the continent being very much resource-based, primary sector dominant, resources getting them from the continent of Africa somewhere else where they can be manufactured into actual finished products. And so think about your assignment that you did as far as where your stuff comes from. Did much of your stuff come from Africa? No, it's not where you're going to find the secondary sector at all. Instead, it's probably where you're going to find a lot of the primary sector. So there's still components to those products that you own and you consume. They're from Africa. You just don't know it because it doesn't say made in Senegal, made in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's because it's made in typically a newly industrializing country somewhere outside of Africa. So is there a new kind of colonialism? I would argue, yes, there is. It's just different. Instead of states, it's multinational corporations, state-run corporations in the case of China that are definitely heavy as far as investing in Africa, but also leaving behind some of the same legacies that we saw previously in the era of imperialism. For a more nuanced and fuller discussion of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the role of colonialism, conflict minerals, and all of that, I suggest visiting the BBC country profile for the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the text, I've also posted a web link to a video produced by National Geographic that explains the roots of the Mali crisis. And so it's a nice way to showcase another country that has this, first off, the era of colonialism, has geometric boundaries, has conflict, but has a certain group that is a minority nation in a few different states.